Welcome back to another episode of the Outdoor Adventures podcast here on Brownfield. I'm Brent Barnett, and we're talking with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources on this week's show. Jace Elliott, a state deer biologist with the DNR, is with us. Jace, how are you doing here today?
I'm doing great.
Thanks a lot for being here. We have a lot to get to, particularly about the deer population in western Iowa. But before we really dive into the topic today, you might just let the listeners know more about yourself, your background with the DNR, and just some of the work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm the state deer biologist for the DNR. I started in this role a couple years ago and officially started with the department in 2021. My background in deer extends back to when I was an undergraduate at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I volunteered on some deer capture projects with the Wisconsin DNR. After graduating with my bachelor's in conservation biology, I started a master's program with the Auburn University Deer Lab down in Alabama, where I conducted hands-on field work, capturing fawns and adult deer, and led a couple research projects over the few years that I was down there.
Well, the DNR has been hosting, I should say, some deer population meetings this month in western Iowa. There's already been several that have taken place, but just coming up here in the coming week, it looks like July 15th, you'll be in Ottawa, July 16th in Haywarden, Sioux City on the 17th, and then July 18th in Cherokee. Jace, let's break this down for the listeners and have you kind of go into why these meetings are taking place.
Yeah, you bet, Brent. So these meetings really have two main purposes. The first of which is for our department to be able to interact and discuss these topics with local hunters in these communities. Obviously, the topic that we're going to be talking about is acknowledging the deer population decline, unfortunately, in this part of the state that's really been taking place over the last 10 or so years in western Iowa. So the meetings start with me presenting some data and information that we have to the folks that attend. This data is going to include our population and harvest trends. We're going to take a look at landscape and habitat changes over the course of time, predator abundance and disease outbreaks, as well as getting into some of our regulatory strategies for recovering the populations. But in my opinion, the biggest takeaway from these meetings is the engagement that we get with hunters in these local communities. Everyone that attends gets an opportunity to fill out a questionnaire that's then used to generate a report, which is used to basically defend our management decisions that are taking place in this part of the state based on the support that we get from our hunters.
For the DNR to go out and have these public engagement sessions, just how serious of a concern is the deer population in the western side of the state right now?
You know, what we're hearing from hunters really from northwest all the way down to southwest Iowa is that this deer population issue is getting to the point that we're starting to see and hear from hunters that are no longer interested in even hunting deer. Obviously, this is a major concern for us because in order for us to manage our deer population, we need deer hunters to participate. So that being said, it would be cause enough for hosting these meetings simply on the basis that a very important wildlife resource that we have, which is whitetail deer, has become degraded over time in this part of the state, and it's no longer offering the recreational opportunities that we would like to see.
So as you reflect on some of these numbers, Jace, what have been some of the main contributing factors? I believe you said this decline has been ongoing for about 10 or more years. What's been the leading causes?
That's a great question. And of course, that's a topic that I spend over 30 minutes talking about in these meetings, but I'm happy to provide a concise version today. So really, the main primary factor based on all the data that we have was a fairly aggressive harvest strategy that was taken in the mid 2000s throughout the state of Iowa. as a result of an unbalanced and rather overabundant population in the state. Now, because that was a statewide issue that basically having too many deer on the landscape was incurring too many costs for certain stakeholder groups, that we issued a statewide solution, which was increasing antlerless quotas quite heavily over the course of about 10 years, between roughly 2003 to 2013. Now, this solution worked in most of the state, but unfortunately, it had regional consequences in Western Iowa specifically that led to driving deer numbers below where we would have liked them to be. In 2013, we began taking quotas off of the table in much of the state, including Western Iowa. So we expect that we would have started to see a population recovery at that time. However, 2012 represented the first year that we had a severe EHD outbreak, which is epizootic hemorrhagic disease. It's a viral seasonal disease that can have varying impacts on population. But what we know is that in 2012, it had a very strong effect in Western Iowa compared to the rest of the state. Since 2012, there's been at least 5 severe outbreaks that we've been made aware of throughout the state, which certainly hasn't helped the deer population recover either. Of course, there's other more minor contributing factors, such as relatively high coyote abundance in Western Iowa, as well as a reduction of deer habitat throughout the last couple decades that mostly comes in the form of losing CRP and other grassland cover to more row crop agriculture.
Jace, do weather events have an impact on deer populations when we look back the last 3 years, where I know Western Iowa specifically dealt with extreme drought conditions, and then you look at this year with some flooding situations in the western portion of the state? Has that had any impact? Has the DNR been following that at all?
So that's a difficult thing to assess, of course, because weather can be so variable across the state. But to get at your question, I'll start with drought. Now, what we know about how drought affects deer is that there does seem to be some evidence that severe drought can affect the productivity of deer reproducing by impacting fawn recruitment. Of course, when things dry up, there's less natural forage for deer to feed on, and that certainly can impact their population to some degree. But we don't really think that year-to-year weather is driving this. Whitetail deer are an extremely resilient species that in most cases can thrive in, different habitat and landscape conditions throughout over half of our country. They're certainly thriving in drier places than Iowa. However, certain things like flooding, when it correlates with the fawning season, likely does have some impacts to recruitment as well. But we recognize that the deer population decline we're seeing in Western Iowa is far more of a systemic issue than the one that's resulting from annual weather patterns.
Circling back to the EHD disease you were talking about just a few minutes ago, do we know what leads to an outbreak of that disease in white-tailed deer? Is it conditions, or what are some of the factors that lead to that?
It's a difficult question to answer, and there's a lot of research that's been done to try to answer that question. Really, the best information that I've been made aware of is that drought conditions tend to exacerbate the outbreaks that we see. But with that being said, a severe drought year does not necessarily mean we'll have a severe outbreak, although severe outbreaks do tend to occur on drought years. Really, it's a more complicated equation of timing of drought, severity of drought, and really it becomes very difficult to predict. So, for instance, in 2022, just a couple summers ago, we had a severe drought by every measure, but we saw very mild disease activity. However, this most recent summer in 23, we did see a relatively very severe outbreak throughout the state of Iowa, despite similar drought conditions.
Our guest on this week's show is Jace Elliott, state deer biologist with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. Talking about habitat, Jace, what changes have we seen when it comes to the habitat landscape in Western Iowa? Has this been a big contributing factor?
It likely has been somewhat of a contributing factor in the analysis that we conducted to try to answer that question. Was comparing the landscape changes in Western Iowa compared to the rest of the state. And when I'm talking about Western Iowa, in this case, we're talking about those 18 counties that make up the western two tiers of counties in Western Iowa. So the Missouri River adjacent counties, as well as those to the east. Now, whether we're talking about Western Iowa or the rest of the state, it's clear that if we're looking back 20 years to the early 2000s, we certainly have lost what would be considered deer habitat. That's mostly come in the form of grasslands loss, and that grassland has mostly been replaced by row crop agriculture or urban development.
So hunting season will be approaching pretty quickly. I know the archery opener is October 1st in the state. What are you saying to hunters at this time that are in Western Iowa? Should they proceed with their plans as normal? What's that looking like right now?
We set regulations in order to define the resource to some degree, but as you mentioned, hunters are subject to, harvest within our legal framework as they see fit. However, for hunters in Western Iowa that are concerned about deer numbers on their property being low, then we would encourage hunters to refrain from harvesting female deer as population dynamics are most sensitive to female harvest. By shifting behavior to focusing on harvesting male deer or bucks, they're likely allowing that population a little bit more relief in recovery in future years. Our regulations do reflect that. In fact, our proposed changes for the upcoming season were actually just approved by our Natural Resources Commission earlier today, which involves a reduction in county doe tags throughout Southwest Iowa, as well as adding, I believe, 6 counties in Western Iowa to a buck-only restriction during the first gun season.
It sounds like you've already had some great feedback from hunters that have attended some of the sessions that have already taken place. What's the goal moving forward, Jace? How will the DNR use this information?
So it's a great question, and you're absolutely right. These meetings so far have pleasantly surprised me with how well attended they are. Of course, most of these meetings are taking place in rather rural parts of the state, with a couple exceptions. But we're seeing upwards of 30 to 40 individuals attending these meetings each meeting. So that really is fantastic, and certainly helps us understand how folks in these parts of the state are feeling. But to answer your question, the goal moving forward is to use the feedback that we get from hunters who are expressing their opinions in verbal comments or actually leaving those comments on our questionnaire, and using that data to form the basis of our future population recovery efforts, should what we've already done and proposed not result in the population increase that we're expecting.
From what you've gathered so far, are hunters concerned with the deer population in that area?
Absolutely. I can tell you that off the top of my head, and of course, we've only had to date 3 meetings so far, a 4th one coming later tonight. We've seen over 100 folks give their feedback, and I haven't heard one single attendee express verbally that they're happy with deer numbers. In fact, we see an overwhelming unsatisfaction among hunters in this area that have basically seen the deer population continue to dwindle over the last couple decades. And of course, that is reasonable to come with a healthy amount of frustration. So it's our hopes that these meetings are going to shed light on the actions our department is taking to try to recover that population and improve the experience for deer hunters in this part of the state.
Again, like we mentioned, there are some meetings coming up this next week, July 15th in Ottawa, July 16th at Haywarden, July 17th in Sioux City, and July 18th in Cherokee. Jace, if hunters want more information on these upcoming meetings and they'd like to attend, how do they get more info on locations and what do they need to prepare for?
Yeah, so hunters or landowners, anybody that's interested in attending is welcome, and they can find details for this information by Googling Western Iowa Deer Initiative meetings. They will likely see a media press release that our department has published online that gives all of the venue details, as well as provides some overview and background into what will be discussed. In terms of what to prepare for, there's really no preparation necessary. We're just looking to hear from as many folks in these areas as we can and allow that to guide our management decisions going forward.
Jace, thanks for coming here on the show, and good luck with the meetings.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
Again, Jace Elliott, a state deer biologist with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, right here on Brownfield Outdoor Adventures. Thanks for watching this week.